Hello, everyone. My name is Matthew Sheehan, and welcome to Code Conversations. Before we begin, Code acknowledges that our association spans land across Turtle Island, which is the traditional territory of many Indigenous peoples. We honor them as the original storytellers and stewards of this land. May we never forget their legacies, and may we learn well the lessons their descendants have to teach us for living on and with the earth. We will practice the sign of respect, acknowledge the rich history of these lands and Indigenous nations, honor the truth of the past, and uphold our original treaty, the Two-Row Wampum, peacefully care for the land and each other through our drama and dance teaching practices. And I'm coming at you right now from the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Wendat Huron peoples. A land acknowledgement is nothing without action, and we need to bear this in mind through our teaching practice every day. Joining me for this conversation are educators Sultan, Rana, and Rizwana, Kaderdina. Sultan has been an educator for 13 years and would best describe himself as a person who's under construction. Working for the vast majority of his career in the elementary panel of the York Region District School Board, Sultan has also taught in both the secondary classroom and on university campuses in Malaysia and the United States. Holding an MA in digital technologies, Sultan worked as a digital literacy consultant for the York Regional District School Board for a couple of years and attempts to be a leader in integrating digital technologies both in his practice as a K-12 educator and his current position as a seconded instructor at York University's Faculty of Education. Sultan has written resources, conducted workshops, and supported educators, candidates, and seasoned on topics related to modern learning, CRRP, equity, inclusion, anti-racism, and Islamophobia for a number of schools, conferences, symposiums, and organizations, both in person and online for the past decade. Rizwana Kaderdina taught in the elementary panel of the York Regional District School Board for many years before moving into her current role, which focuses on equity and anti-oppression. Rizwana is currently the co-chair of the Alliance of Educators for Muslim Students, and is also a member of the Muslim Educators Network of Ontario, and the Asian Canadian Educators Network, and Al Ansar Foundation, and is a volunteer with Victim Services of York Region. Rizwana believes in service, advocacy, and community. She strives to work from a justice-oriented stance. She's intrigued by the possibilities for healing and transformation that come through affinity and solidarity-based work. Welcome both of you to Code Conversations.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Matthew.
I'm really happy to have you both here. This Code Conversation came really naturally out of a conversation we were having at the FESI conference that you both, I know Sultan, you were one of the organizers, and you both presented at that conference. Am I correct? Yes. Correct. Our conversation was so engrossing that it stayed with me for many days after that. And I'm so happy that we're able to join today to have this conversation. So we're going to get right into things. And I think we'll just take turns who answers the question first. But CODE is a drama and dance subject association. So one of the main things we're curious about is what role has drama and dance in education played in perpetuating Islamophobia in classrooms? Rizwana, why don't we start with you, then we'll move on to Sultan.
I'm happy to start, but I feel like Sultan's reaction spoke volumes. So I think maybe I'll pass it over to Sultan first and then add on.
There you go.
Yeah, I was just smiling because I was happy when to Rizwana first, because she always she always breaks the stage when she's done speaking. So but I'll go ahead. You know what, I guess I'll just say something quickly, is that often I feel like drama and dance centers the lived experiences, lives, and real meticulous journey, hero's journey, you might say, from a Eurocentric lens. And often through that Eurocentric lens, there's a lot of positive struggle, a lot of innuendo that allows you to empathize with the character. And in many of those stories, there are also enemies or oppositional bodies or powers. And I feel like, I can't say in the most recent years, but at least in my childhood, there have always been these, Eurocentric centered stories or experiences, be it fictional or non-fictional, that uplift the Euro experience and repress or demonize other bodies. So I could say that, we could argue about that, be it all the way from movies and media to school-based plays, but I'll start off there and pass it on to Rizwana. And I feel, and I didn't even kind of articulate the the ways and how Islamophobia plays off there. I just want to set the platform as saying, you know, just at the moment, that negative space of where Islamophobia is perpetuated is when we speak about only certain people's experiences and see them as heroes, and not others.
Yeah, I can maybe pick up on some of those pieces too, Sultan, and thank you for, as you said, you know, setting the stage on that conversation. I think that it's really layered, right? There are pieces around the actual content of the drama dance. There's the curriculum, and then there's what is actually taught, which does not always align. And that is where we often find ourselves in a position of challenge, because we know that the curriculum is structured one way, and then how, and I say this as someone who is still learning about how to teach drama and dance well in a classroom, and wasn't really guided to look at the curriculum first. Right? It was more about, here's a unit, get it done, get your assessment, and then check, right? And then needed to look back and say, wait a minute, this doesn't actually align with the curriculum, or the curriculum is more open, maybe than we're led to believe. So there's the curricular pieces, and then there are the broader social pieces attached to drama and dance, right? In terms of the curricular pieces, the first thing we always go back to is accommodations. And accommodations for Muslim students who are observing in a particular way or understand their faith in a particular way, is something that often comes up. And unfortunately, when there is what I would call latent Islamophobia or xenophobia present, that manifests when families or students ask for accommodations, right? There's a resentment, there's a frustration, sometimes an understandable frustrations around, you know, well, I have a curriculum, I have a program, rather not a curriculum, I have a program, this is how I do it, and now I have to change everything because of this one student, right? And I think that when that compounds or intersects with underlying Islamophobia, whether that's examined or unexamined by the educator who is having to make those accommodations, it manifests in particular ways for the students and families at times, right, where they do become targeted or they become isolated. I think on a broader scope, dance is a space in which, dance as we understand it, is a space in which often the Muslim identity is absent, right? It's just, you look at pop culture, you look at different spaces, and we have a very specific and I would say narrow definition of what comprises dance, and that is not always aligned with the ways in which all Muslims practice, and we know that Muslim practice is extremely diverse, right? When it comes to drama, we think about the scope of drama. We're thinking about everything from plays, theater, right to, you know, to movies and Hollywood, and I could probably go on for hours about that. And so I won't, I'll just say that there's a very particular narrative that has been constructed around Muslim identity. And the drama world, I would argue, carries a lot of responsibility for the construction of that narrative. You know, I know we talked about drama dance and then, you know, as our focus, and then the arts. It used to be that visual arts really were the place where Orientalism was deeply expressed. I would argue that in our modern day times, the narrative of what it means to be Muslim has been constructed by a Hollywood that has decided, has made certain decisions. And those decisions make it very clear that according to that narrative, Muslims are a threat, Muslims don't belong, we are in direct opposition to what is represented by the West, which, you know, Sultan talked about upholding certain Eurocentric ideals or ideas. And that may not always feel like it's connected to what we do in our classrooms. You know, I taught grade 6, so how does that connect to what I do in my grade 6 classroom? It feels very distant, but I think we need to think about and unpack the relationships between all of these different pieces. So like I said, I could go on for hours, but maybe we'll pause there. first.
And I want to come in here just to
Yeah.
stand by my initial statement that when Rizwana speaks, she breaks the stage. So as I become as I come in as the caretaker, sweeping up the knowledge she just dropped on everyone, I actually would like to rephrase the question back to you, Matt. And it's not what role has drama and dance in education played in perpetuating Islamophobia, based on the eloquent way Rizwana has laid it out. The question really is, what role have drama and dance educators played in perpetuating Islamophobia? I think that's the question we move forward with.
So talk about dropping knowledge, breaking the stage, Sultan. That's a killer reframing. Thank you for that.
Digital high five.
Yeah, and I want to actually draw us back to one thing that Rizwana you brought up, and it was around we're talking about curriculum versus pedagogy, and it's interesting because I mean, like, you're talking about those things in the curriculum that were more inclusive, and I find like especially when the curriculum gets older, like curriculum can often be restrictive in a way that pedagogy needs to outstrip it. In a sense, I mean, so I mean, it's a constant battle to that needs to be at the forefront of our minds when thinking about our programming, and it can't just be about you know, getting something done and getting to an assessment. It needs to be thoughtful and purposeful, which leads me to my next question. What suggestions do you have for drama and dance teachers to combat Islamophobia in the classrooms? And so we start with Sultan the first time. So Rizwana, why don't we start with you with that question?
I think that if we're going to, you know, building on what Sultan did in terms of reframing, maybe something that would be helpful is, you know, when we are encountering situations, we as educators are encountering situations where we're looking at accommodations, maybe we can reframe that for ourselves so that instead of thinking about all the things that the student can't do, and by extension, I as the educator then can't do, maybe that's an opportunity to think about what can we do, right? What can the student do? And therefore, by extension, what can I as the educator do, right? So I think that's one you know, way of thinking that might be useful for folks. I think something else that might, you know, when we talk about combating Islamophobia, representation matters. And that's, you know, we use that phrase all the time. We use it because there's a lot of truth in it. You know, affirmation is extremely important, right? Affirmation from the time students are in kindergarten and onwards. And there's a lot of room for exploration as students get older of issues of Islamophobia, of anti-Black racism, anti-indigeneity, all you know, all of these other areas, and which intersect, by the way. But before we get into oppression, we really need to get to affirmation. And so how do we create space for students to tell their own stories, to share their identities, to be able to be proud of who they are within or through the drama and dance curricula, right? And that's, you know, that's really not very difficult. It's CRRP at its core, right? It is about how do we affirm our students and give them space to be who they are, or rather stop denying them the space to be who they are. So Sultan, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I'll just say that to educators out there to understand, or to, not, I'm sure you know, but like keep in the forefront of your mind that the arts, visual drama and dance, it's the, I guess, the space where you can be a revolutionary educator. You know, if you're like, I would argue that I'm an abolitionist, and I would believe, like, I would love to see a remix and a revolution to the curriculum as we see it. Drama and dance provides you that space. So if you see, if we're talking about on the grounds of Islamophobia, if you see something that needs to be addressed, there are ways to engage with that through the curriculum, as Rizwana was saying, that you can actually engage students in some really revolutionary thinking. You know, and when we say age appropriate, it doesn't mean that you water it down for the younger ages. Like, there's different entry points for every student to understand. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is do your homework. Like, as an educator, do your homework. Like, know about the identities that are in the classroom, know about the nuances about, you know, what is it like to be a second and third generation Canadian Muslim who, you know, your parents were born Canadians and only your grandparents were immigrants. So knowing what the experience for your students are to be, I won't say disconnected, but distant from heritage that they have lineage to. And what could that look like in your classroom? What could it look like for a student to not only see themselves, but to have an opportunity to see themselves further in a way that they haven't had space created for them in any other way? You know, I could say that from my like, I'm the son of two Pakistani immigrants, but I'm very much an urban cat. You know what I mean? Like, hip hop and R&B is my life, but my Pakistani lineage is far and distant from me. Doesn't mean I'm you know, I wouldn't want to engage with it in the classroom, but again, that's in the hands of the teacher to provide me that opportunity. So I'd say do your homework and know that how could you have your students see themselves in the programming in rich ways that are not superficial, but like really go to the core and the depth of who your students are and the things that they're interested in seeing. And then I'll just kind of leave it at this, and Rizwana touched on it earlier, is that, you know, it's Islamic art and Islamic expressions of dance and drama, they're not a monolith. It's the second biggest religion in the world. And as much as we argue that, you know, we're a secular school, you know, secular school system, a secular system, we're not. We're not. We're ubiquitously Christian and Judeo-Christian, but we just don't name it because, you know, our calendar is set up to follow Judeo-Christian holidays, and you know, certain figureheads can be mentioned in school without, you know, drawing any attention or perking any ears, but we're not a secular system. You know, we're washed in Judeo-Christian experiences, and integrating other faiths and religions doesn't take away from the secular intentions we have as a school system. So I wanted to say that first, but the Islamic experience around drama and dance is not monolithic. There are, you know, from going from Turkey to swirling dervishes, and how that movement could be integrated into dance particularly, or drama, or just understanding the reasons behind it, all the way to North African art and expression. What could be perceived as dance and drama through an Islamic lens is not a single answer. There are so many different entry points and so many ways to integrate, but it all comes back to, as Rizwana was saying, relationships. Know your students, know the tenets of CRRP. And when you know the students and the families that you serve, it is not very difficult to go further and have, you know, and touch base with the most arguably revolutionary aspect of the curriculum, which could be the arts, and really have a program that reflects your students.
Awesome. You really shouldn't take too much away from your answers when you said that Rizwana always demolishes the stage, because you do a pretty good. I don't have a stage left. You both just keep throwing.
Hey, she's my sister. Everywhere we go, anytime her and I speak, it's literally like we're like a WWE tag team. So I'm more than happy to constantly refer to her. I learn a great deal from her, so I have no problem at all.
No, I think you both.
I always have to live up to the bar that you set. So.
Okay. Last question I have for both of you, and it really has to do with talking about problems that are misconceptions in schools and school systems. And I think we've already kind of touched on this a little bit, but I would like to know from both of you, what do you think is the number one problem and or misconception in our school system, society at large, or specifically the drama and dance classroom that creates inequities or excludes students?
Well, if we're talking about Muslim students particularly, I would to what Sultan talked about in terms of the assumption that of the monolith, right? There is no one Muslim identity. There's no, you know, one type of Muslim student. You will have the range of humanity represented within your Muslim students, right? That's what I would say that, and within Muslim families. So I think at the end of the day, we just can't make any assumptions. We can't assume that families are going to request accommodations. We can't assume that they're not. We can't assume that students are going to have concerns rooted in faith or the way that they practice their faith when it comes to, you know, the programming, and we can't assume that they're not going to have concerns. So I think that's one thing. And then I think about what it means to be an educator who starts from a place of love. You know, if we genuinely have love for our students and the craft that we are committed to educating about, whether that's drama, dance, you know, literacy, math, whatever it is, then how does that love manifest in our classroom spaces? And are we able to think about whether we are really fostering that love or whether we are causing harm intentionally or unintentionally? And are we willing to be self-critical and self-reflective in that? You know, does the love of our craft and how we have interpreted that craft or, you know, curriculum area, do we prioritize that over the love of our students? Right. And I say that very deliberately because I have seen where, you know, unfortunately, educators have created circumstances where it's been very clear to students that either you do this or you are not committed to this performance or this, you know, whatever activity, whatever it is. And so I guess I go back to, you know, yes, where do we have love and where do we prioritize that love? Do we prioritize that love in our students or in how we understand our craft? And what impact is that going to have? Right? And like, as I said, are we being willing to be self-critical and self-reflective also means being willing to be expansive. Is our definition of, you know, drama, dance, whatever curricular area, is it a very narrow definition or is it an expansive definition? Is our pedagogy narrow or is our pedagogy expansive, right? It's that same idea of you open your heart and you open your mind, or you keep them tight and closed, right? And what opportunities are available for students to flourish and for ourselves as educators to flourish when we are expansive? And when do we create conditions that, you know, leave us in a space of repetition and withering on the vine, right? So I think those are sort of two things that I would bring up.
Awesome. Sultan?
Yeah, I have three things. One, so I'm looking at the question a little differently though, where it says, you know, number one problem or misconceptions in our schools that exclude students or create inequities. I have one thing to say about us as educators, particularly drama and dance, and then one or two, sorry, on problems or misconceptions about perceptions about Islam. So I'll start with the drama and dance one with educators. And this is from my own, I can only speak about my own experiences, but there has to be an intentionality from the educator to not look at drama and dance as an afterthought. I cannot tell you how many times have I seen educators approaching that reporting deadline and be like, oh crap, I didn't do blah, blah, blah. And they will rush through this ass backwards, quick to put in program that's serving nobody but producing a mark. And with that impatience or, you know, quick to implement and quick to get a quantitative mark from, there's like a narrowed focus. And as Rizwana was saying, you know, the love, the care, concern of the child does not probably take the forefront. The objective and the goal is get this done and get it done quickly. So we need to stop doing that. And back to what I was saying about the revolutionary aspects of drama and dance, if you prioritize that and you really want to have a very impactful program, you wouldn't ever see this subject matter as an afterthought. And I apologize for anyone who's listening to this that would never see it as an afterthought. I'm just saying what I've been witness to in the K-8 program when it comes to that horrendous time and near reporting periods and what I hear in my experiences. Now, when it comes to perceptions and misconceptions about Islam, I'll say the first thing, and then the second thing I want to say, I feel like Rizwana could also speak to. The first one is that Islam is a joyless religion. It is not. It is not a religion that is mere like just heavy set in rules and orthodoxy and traditionalism. It is not. It is like any faith. It is reflexive, adaptive, has changed, bound by culture rules, bound by socioeconomic backgrounds and experiences. It's intersectional with all identities whatsoever. And it is not a religion, at the very least, that is void of or reluctant towards joy. It is a very jubilant, happy faith, and one would know that if you knew Muslims, to be honest with you. So I'll say that. And then the second piece I'll say is that Islam, the other misconception is that Islam is inherently oppressive and sees women as less. And that's often where you start seeing this hypersexism that occurs, particularly to Muslim women and Muslim women who are very, based on the way they carry themselves, very evidently Muslim. It's just false. It's a part of the narrative that's been kind of peddled to us in the last 50, 60 years in mass media. It's not true. And I would argue that in our faith, women are valued and protected, and that has been misconstrued. And as I think, as even men are, there are equitable rules to protect the sanctity and the dignity of one person. And the discussion around Muslim men and Muslim women and how we live our full and best lives to value and protect ourselves with dignity and respect have been misconstrued by dominant narratives. So I would say those are the two big things that I would like educators to contemplate about, that it is not joyless and it is not a religion that is hard set on oppressing any particular gender, but women exclusively.
I'm going to jump in and add to that a little bit, if that's okay. And thank you for creating the opportunity, Sultan, the entry point. This takes me back to what Sultan said earlier in terms of Muslim educators and where our conversation started around, latent Islamophobia and how it might manifest in these spaces of drama and dance, right? There is often a desire to rescue or liberate the Muslim from their faith and the Muslim woman from Muslim men. That very definitely plays out in the arts spaces, particularly because the arts are constructed as spaces of freedom and exploration, and Islam is constructed, very deliberately constructed, as a space of repression and restriction. And so when you have these opposing constructions in play, and sometimes constructed, the one is able to be constructed against the other because it provides the foil, right? Then when you have Muslims entering into those spaces, or Muslim students, I will say, because we're talking about schooling right now, entering into those spaces, and you have educators, and by no means is this a blanket statement about educators broadly, some educators who have internalized narratives of Islamophobia and these understandings, those can be dangerous spaces for Muslim students, right? Because they become spaces where either the educator has now written themselves as the savior of the student, or while they have written themselves as the savior, and that saviorism manifests in sometimes a benign, in a benign way, it doesn't make it okay, but it's more benign, and sometimes in extremely harmful ways, right? So when we have narratives of students who tell us that they are expected to take off their hijabs, or male and female students telling us that they are participating in school productions, drama productions, for example, and the educator changes the scene at the last minute, where now these two students are expected to be in extremely close contact with each other, right? That is problematic. And these are things that would not happen with other students because they cross boundaries around consent, They cross boundaries around personal autonomy. And I'm going to be very blunt and say that in some cases, they even cross boundaries around sexual exploitation, where students are, pressured to be in certain situations on stage, performing for an audience who has paid money. That's what we would call sexual exploitation, right? When you ask a person to perform their sexuality for money, who is underage and cannot make that decision legally, right? In any other space and with any other body, that would not be acceptable under any terms whatsoever. And yet, when it comes to Muslim students, somehow there is a set of mental gymnastics that take place that make it okay in the minds of the folks who are doing that, or these educators who are doing that, because they no, I'm rescued, like this, we're helping the student to let go of the repression that they're experiencing. And never mind that we don't actually know what's happening. What research have you done? What conversations have you had with the family? And even if the student was experiencing repression, would that really be the best way to go about supporting the student? It would not, right? So I think, going back again, and I know maybe it sounds like I've gone on a little bit of a tangent, but, it directly relates to these questions of misconceptions of, of Muslim students, Muslim identities, Muslim bodies, right? How does that manifest? I'm giving you a worst case scenario, but really, sometimes we need to look at that to see the spectrum of everything that lies in between, right? We have incredible arts educators who, as Sultan has said, use their spaces of visual arts, drama, dance, music, as spaces of liberation and revolution. And then we have the other extreme. And unfortunately, it's our students who pay the price when it's the other extreme. And so, I think one of the things that, we can continue to do is continue to make sure that we are interrogating what the actions that we take and where they're rooted, right? What is it that is pushing us to make the decisions as educators that we're making?
100%. It's funny. You said you could talk for hours about one topic. I think we could continue this conversation for hours on end, and still have more to discuss. But I want to thank you both so much for coming on this co-conversation. And this is just the beginning, I'm hoping, of a longer conversation that people watching this video will recognizing things that they need to take on themselves because of possible conscious decisions and or subconscious, but that we all need to go on that journey. And I agree 100%. Love those kids and know those kids and know who those people are in front of you, that we're there to provide a safe space, a safe creative space to move forward. So thank you, Sultan, and Sultan, and thank you so much, Rizwana. This was a great conversation, and I can't thank you enough for coming today. Thank you.
For sure, no problem. Thanks for inviting us.
Matthew, thank you so much to you and the co-team for taking this conversation on. It's a huge thing when folks are willing and interested in engaging, and for you and the rest of the co-team to say that we're going to do this is very. I was saying this when we were off recording earlier, but it's incredibly meaningful when folks are interested in engaging in these conversations, and they're heavy, right? They're heavy a lot of the time, so it means a lot. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you both so very much.
For sure.